What if I told you that the Avengers, the heroes who became the crown jewel of modern cinema, the team that turned Marvel into a global powerhouse, and the very faces of a multi-billion-dollar universe, were almost lost before they ever had a chance? Imagine a world where Tony Stark, Captain America, Thor, and the Hulk never assembled on screen. Imagine a reality where the Avengers were split between rival studios, sold off for quick cash, dismissed as second-rate heroes no one believed in. That almost happened, and the story of how close we came to losing Earth's mightiest heroes is one of the most shocking and overlooked sagas in entertainment history. To understand how Marvel almost gave away the Avengers, we have to rewind the clock to a time when superheroes weren't considered golden tickets, but dead weight. A time when Marvel itself was crumbling, desperate, and forced to make choices that nearly destroyed the destiny of its greatest creation, the fall before the rise. Today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe feels inevitable. Billion-dollar films, pop culture domination, kids dressing as Iron Man on Halloween, memes of the Hulk smashing across the internet. But in the 1990s, Marvel was the exact opposite, a sinking ship with no lifeboats in sight. By 1996, Marvel had filed for bankruptcy. Yes, bankruptcy. The company whose stories we now see on every screen was drowning in debt. Comic book sales had collapsed after a speculative boom. Collectors were abandoning the market, and Marvel's empire was cracking under the weight of bad business decisions. Toy Biz, led by Isaac Perlmutter and Avi Arad, stepped in, trying to salvage what remained. But comics weren't enough to keep Marvel alive. The future of the company lay in Hollywood, and that future looked grim. Selling the family silver. To survive, Marvel made a choice that would define decades of entertainment. They began selling their characters, not permanently, but through long-term licensing deals. The logic was simple. Marvel didn't have the money to make big-budget movies, but studios did. So Marvel would hand over rights to their characters in exchange for upfront cash. At the time, no one imagined these heroes would dominate global box offices. Spider-Man went to Sony, X-Men and Fantastic Four went to Fox, Blade found a home at New Line, Daredevil landed at Fox. Even Ghost Rider, Punisher and Elektra were scattered across different studios. But here's the shocking part. In this fire sale, Marvel's most famous team, the Avengers, was left behind. Not because Marvel wanted to protect them, but because nobody wanted them. The Avengers were worthless. Think about that. In the 1990s, Hollywood executives looked at Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Hulk, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and they saw no value. To them, the Avengers weren't Spider-Man, they weren't Batman or Superman, they were side characters at best, outdated relics at worst. In fact, when Marvel executives tried to pitch their library, studios laughed at the idea of the Avengers carrying films. Sony famously dismissed Iron Man and Thor as junk. One former Marvel exec even admitted, nobody wanted the Avengers, they were seen as B-tier. This is the untold irony of Marvel's history. The very heroes who would one day save the company were once considered unsellable. The $25 million rejection. Here's one of the most jaw-dropping facts. In 1998, Marvel went to Sony with a desperate offer. For $25 million, Sony could have bought the rights to nearly every Marvel character, including the Avengers. Let that sink in. For the price of a mid-budget romantic comedy, Sony could have owned Earth's mightiest heroes. But Sony turned it down. They only wanted Spider-Man, who they saw as the crown jewel. As for Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, and the rest, Sony's response was cold and dismissive. Nobody cares about those characters. Keep them. It's one of the most infamous rejections in film history, and it's the only reason Marvel was forced to hold on to the Avengers, bankruptcy's bargain with the devil. But even though Marvel didn't sell the Avengers outright, they still nearly lost them. During the bankruptcy crisis, Marvel struck a deal with Merrill Lynch in 2005. To secure a $525 million loan, Marvel put up its characters as collateral. That means if Marvel's new movie studio failed, the Avengers, along with the rest of Marvel's library, would have been repossessed by the bank. Imagine the horror. Earth's mightiest heroes, owned not by storytellers, but by bankers auctioning them off to the highest bidder. This wasn't some distant possibility, it was a razor's edge gamble. If Iron Man flopped in 2008, Marvel Studios would have been gutted before the Avengers ever assembled. The Hulk's wandering rights. And then there's the Hulk. Many fans don't know this, but Hulk's film rights were already tied up with Universal. That's why Marvel could use Hulk in ensemble films like Avengers, but struggled to make solo movies. Hulk was technically part of the Avengers, yet still half lost to another studio. The same could have happened to the rest of the team. Imagine if Thor had ended up with Paramount forever, or Captain America with Fox. Instead of one unified Marvel Cinematic Universe, we would have had a Frankenstein patchwork of rival studios, each owning a piece of the Avengers puzzle. The turning point nobody saw coming. The irony of Marvel's desperation is that it forced them to gamble on the very heroes nobody wanted. When Spider-Man, X-Men, and Fantastic Four were off the table, Marvel had no choice but to turn inward. That's how Iron Man became the first Marvel Studios film in 2008. It wasn't because Iron Man was beloved, far from it. He was considered a B-list character, but he was one of the few major heroes Marvel still controlled. And here's the chilling truth. Had Sony accepted that $25 million deal, Iron Man would have been gone. Thor would have been gone. Captain America would have been gone. The Avengers as a concept would never have belonged to Marvel Studios. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, the single most successful film franchise in history, would never have existed. All because the world once thought the Avengers weren't worth it. Seeds of destiny. At this point in the story, we see destiny at work. Marvel, humiliated and bankrupt, rejected by studios, forced to cling to the Avengers not out of pride, but out of necessity. And yet, that very act of holding on became their salvation. This is why the Avengers story is legendary. Not because they were always icons, but because they were once forgotten, dismissed, and nearly sold for scraps. The heroes who would define 21st century cinema were almost erased from Marvel's own future. If you're enjoying this journey into the untold history of how Marvel almost lost the Avengers, don't forget to subscribe to Legacy Biographies, hit the like button, and share this video with others who love powerful life stories. Also, drop a comment. Tell us one fact you know about the Avengers history that we didn't cover yet, or simply share how you felt about this video in just 1 or 2 lines. The story of how Marvel held onto the Avengers isn't just about desperate deals and failed sales. It's also about power struggles, risky bets, and moments when the entire dream could have collapsed again. Because even after the Avengers escaped being sold off, their road to the big screen was anything but guaranteed. The tug of war inside Marvel. To truly understand the Avengers' survival, you need to know about the men pulling the strings: Avi Arad, Isaac Perlmutter, and Kevin Feige. Avi Arad was the first architect of Marvel's Hollywood push. A former toy executive, he saw movies as giant advertisements for action figures. Arad was the one who brokered the original licensing deals with Fox, Sony, and New Line. To him, Spider-Man and X-Men were the future. Isaac Perlmutter, Marvel's CEO, was a ruthless businessman. Famously reclusive, Perlmutter pinched pennies like no other. His philosophy was survival at any cost. He didn't care about artistic glory. He cared about making sure Marvel didn't go bankrupt again. And then there was Kevin Feige, a young producer who worked under Arad in the early 2000s. Feige had an encyclopedic knowledge of Marvel comics and a vision for something no one else dared to imagine: a shared universe where all the heroes lived together, just like in the comics. These 3 men clashed constantly. Their fights nearly derailed Marvel Studios before it even began. And at the center of those battles, the Avengers, the Iron Man gamble. When Marvel secured a $525 million loan from Merrill Lynch in 2005, the plan was clear: make their own movies using the characters they still owned. But who did they have left? Spider-Man, X-Men, and Fantastic Four were gone. Blade was gone. Daredevil was gone. Even Hulk was tied up with Universal. What remained was Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Ant-Man, and a few others. These were not hot properties. To Hollywood, they were leftovers. But to Kevin Feige, they were the seeds of something bigger. So Marvel placed its first big bet. Iron Man would launch Marvel Studios. It was a shocking choice. Iron Man wasn't a household name. He wasn't Superman or Batman. He wasn't even Spider-Man. Even worse, the project had a dangerous history. For nearly 2 decades, Iron Man had been stuck in development hell. Studios like Universal and Fox had tried and failed to make an Iron Man movie. Scripts had been written and abandoned. Actors had been attached and dropped. Nobody believed in it. Yet in 2006, Marvel rolled the dice on Iron Man. They poured much of their Merrill Lynch loan into the project. And here's the terrifying truth. If Iron Man flopped, the Avengers would have been lost forever. Because those characters were collateral. The bank would have seized the rights, and Marvel Studios would have been dismantled before it even truly began. Robert Downey Jr. The last chance casting. Even the casting of Tony Stark was a gamble of cosmic proportions. Marvel executives were divided. Some wanted Tom Cruise, others wanted a safer star. But Jon Favreau, the director, fought tooth and nail for Robert Downey Jr. At the time, Downey was considered a washed-up actor. His history of drug addiction, arrests, and rehab stints made him a massive liability. Insurance companies didn't want to touch him. Studios didn't want to risk their reputations. But Favreau saw what others didn't. Downey was Tony Stark. The genius, the arrogance, the flaws, the need for redemption, it was all real. Marvel took the risk. They cast him. And in doing so, they unknowingly saved not just Iron Man, but the entire Avengers dream. Because Downey didn't just play Tony Stark. He was the spark that ignited the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Without him, Iron Man would have been another forgotten superhero movie. With him, it became a phenomenon. The post-credit scene that almost didn't happen now. Here's where things get really interesting. After Iron Man wrapped, Kevin Feige pushed for something crazy, a post-credit scene teasing the Avengers. Remember, in 2008, post-credit stingers weren't the cultural event they are today. This was new, untested, and risky. Feige wanted to hint at something no studio had ever attempted before. An interconnected universe of films leading to one massive crossover. The scene was simple. Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, telling Tony Stark, "You've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers initiative." But here's the shocking part. Marvel didn't even own the rights to use the word Avengers in films at the time. They had to negotiate legal loopholes and keep the cameo under wraps. Studio executives feared it would be too confusing. Some even wanted to cut it entirely. Yet Feige insisted, and in that one moment, Marvel planted the seed of the Avengers on the big screen. Had that scene been removed, the MCU might never have gained momentum. The idea of Earth's mightiest heroes uniting would have remained buried. Avengers in jeopardy. Again. Even after Iron Man's success, the Avengers weren't safe. Paramount distributed the early Marvel films, and there were constant battles over budgets and creative control. Isaac Perlmutter slashed costs wherever he could. He infamously fought against hiring Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow because he didn't believe female superheroes could sell toys. He tried to block Samuel L. Jackson's contract because he thought audiences wouldn't support a black Nick Fury. At one point, Perlmutter even considered cancelling the Avengers film outright because he thought it was too risky. Imagine that. Marvel's CEO almost pulled the plug on the very movie that would define the MCU. Feige and others had to fight tooth and nail to keep the Avengers' dream alive. Every casting decision, every budget allocation, every creative choice was a battlefield. The Sony connection that nearly stole it all. Here's another rarely discussed twist. During the early MCU years, Marvel still had to negotiate with Sony over Spider-Man. Feige wanted Spider-Man in the Avengers from the very beginning, but Sony wasn't interested. They saw Spider-Man as their golden goose. They refused to share him. At one point, Sony even proposed building their own shared universe around Spider-Man villains, effectively cutting Marvel out. If that had succeeded, the Avengers might have been forced to exist without one of their most iconic members. It wasn't until 2015, long after the Avengers had already exploded on screen, that Marvel finally struck a deal to bring Spider-Man home. But in those early days, it was a bitter reminder. Even though Marvel still had the Avengers, the dream was fragile and incomplete. Assembling Earth's mightiest heroes, The road to 2012's The Avengers was paved with doubt. Every film leading up to it, Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, Captain America, the first Avenger, was a test. If any one of them failed, the dream would have collapsed. Remember, Marvel was still paying back its massive loan. The Avengers project was like building a house of cards in a hurricane, but against all odds, it worked. Each movie built momentum, each character gained fans. The vision of Kevin Feige, once mocked as impossible, was becoming real. And when The Avengers finally premiered in 2012, it didn't just succeed, it shattered records. $1.5 billion at the box office, a cultural earthquake. The heroes once dismissed as worthless became the most valuable franchise in cinema. A close call with disaster. But here's the chilling truth. If even one domino had fallen differently, the Avengers might have never assembled. If Marvel had sold their rights to Sony in 1998 for $25 million, the Avengers would have been scattered across rival studios. If Iron Man had flopped in 2008, Merrill Lynch would have seized the characters and sold them off. If Robert Downey Jr. hadn't been cast, the MCU might never have gained its beating heart. If Kevin Feige hadn't fought for that post-credit scene, audiences might never have dreamed of the Avengers initiative. If Isaac Perlmutter had gotten his way, the Avengers film might have been cancelled entirely. Every victory was balanced on a knife's edge. Every success was born from the ashes of failure. The legacy of almost losing the Avengers. By the time the Avengers conquered the world, Marvel's gamble had paid off. The heroes nobody wanted, the team almost sold for scraps, had become the saviors of an empire. But their story isn't just about triumph, it's about fragility. It's about how close the Avengers came to being lost forever. The world we live in today, where kids dress as Iron Man, where Thor and Captain America are global icons, where Avengers assemble, is one of the most famous lines in cinema, exists only because of 1,000 lucky breaks and a few stubborn dreamers who refused to let go. When The Avengers premiered in 2012, it felt like destiny fulfilled. The heroes who had once been rejected, dismissed, and nearly sold for scraps were now global icons. The MCU wasn't just a franchise, it was a cultural revolution. But what many people don't realize is that even after this triumph, the shadow of those near losses continued to loom over Marvel. The Avengers were safe, but the fight for their legacy wasn't over. Disney's billion-dollar safety net. The single biggest turning point after The Avengers was Disney's acquisition of Marvel in 2009, just before the first team-up was completed. Disney paid $4 billion, a staggering sum at the time, to bring Marvel fully under its wing. With Disney's deep pockets and global influence, the Avengers were no longer in danger of being sold off for cash. No more collateral loans, no more bankruptcy fears. For the first time in decades, Marvel's heroes were home. But this wasn't just about money. Disney gave Marvel Studios the freedom to think bigger, to take risks that smaller companies never could. That safety net allowed the Avengers to explode beyond imagination. Yet, even then, not everything was perfect. The ghosts of past deals still haunted the MCU. The Hulk problem. One of the strangest legacies of Marvel's licensing days was the Hulk. Universal had held distribution rights to solo Hulk films since the early 2000s. This meant Marvel could use Hulk in the Avengers and other crossover films, but they couldn't easily make standalone Hulk movies without Universal's cooperation. That's why, after The Incredible Hulk in 2008, there was never another true Hulk solo film. Fans begged for Planet Hulk or World War Hulk, but legal shackles held the character back. In a way, Hulk's struggles were a reminder of how fragile Marvel's empire once was. Even as the Avengers dominated, pieces of their story still belonged to other studios. The Spider-Man dilemma. Then came the tug-of-war with Sony over Spider-Man. By the mid-2010s, Sony's Spider-Man films were stumbling. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 underperformed, and the studio was scrambling. Kevin Feige saw an opening. He negotiated an unprecedented deal. Sony would keep ownership of Spider-Man, but Marvel could integrate him into the Avengers universe. It was a compromise born of desperation on Sony's part, and brilliance on Marvel's. This is why Spider-Man appeared in Captain America, Civil War, why he fought alongside Iron Man, why he became part of the Avengers legacy. But it was never guaranteed. Even today, the deal between Sony and Marvel is fragile, renewed film by film, project by project. The Avengers might have been saved, but their family was still incomplete. Pieces of their destiny remained in the hands of others. The battles behind the curtain. Even after Disney secured Marvel, internal battles raged. Isaac Perlmutter, still CEO of Marvel Entertainment, clashed constantly with Kevin Feige over creative decisions. Perlmutter wanted to slash budgets, limit diversity, and keep Marvel under tight financial control. Feige wanted to expand, innovate, and build a cinematic legacy worthy of the comics. By 2015, the tension reached a breaking point. Feige threatened to leave Marvel entirely, unless he was freed from Perlmutter's oversight. Disney CEO Bob Iger stepped in, siding with Feige. From that moment on, Feige reported directly to Disney, not Marvel Entertainment. This power shift saved the Avengers' future. Without it, the MCU might have collapsed under penny-pinching and short-sighted decisions. Once again, the Avengers' destiny hung on the brink of disaster, rescued only by one decisive move: the fragile web of rights. Even as the MCU conquered the world, Marvel's old licensing deals continued to cause headaches. The X-Men and Fantastic Four still belonged to Fox, forcing Marvel to dance around key characters and storylines. For years, fans dreamed of seeing Wolverine fight alongside Captain America, or Reed Richards joining Tony Stark in a battle of geniuses. But those dreams were blocked by contracts signed decades earlier. It wasn't until Disney purchased 20th Century Fox in 2019 that Marvel finally regained control of the X-Men and Fantastic Four. With that deal, nearly all of Marvel's heroes were finally under one roof again. The irony is staggering. The very characters Marvel once sold off in desperation, X-Men, Fantastic Four, became billion-dollar pawns in corporate acquisitions. And the Avengers, once unwanted, had become the glue that held the MCU together. What if the Avengers had been sold? Pause for a moment and imagine the alternate history. Sony could have owned Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America, scattering them into disconnected films with no vision of a shared universe. Fox might have claimed the Avengers, blending them awkwardly with X-Men in a way that robbed both of their identity. Universal could have carved off Hulk entirely, leaving the team without its strongest member. And Marvel Studios? It might never have existed at all. Instead of the Avengers in 2012, we might have had a handful of forgotten superhero movies, each one fighting for scraps of attention with no assemble moment to unite them. The cultural phenomenon we now take for granted, kids shouting "Avengers Assemble" in playgrounds, fans around the world crying when Tony Stark snapped his fingers in Endgame, none of it would exist. All because in 1998, Sony said no. The miracle of Iron Man. At the heart of all of this lies a single film, Iron Man. Had Iron Man been anything less than spectacular, the dream would have collapsed. The Avengers wouldn't exist as we know them. Robert Downey Jr. might have been dismissed as a failed comeback. Marvel Studios might have folded before making a second film. Instead, Iron Man became lightning in a bottle. It was a perfect storm of casting, storytelling, timing, and sheer stubborn will. It didn't just launch a franchise, it resurrected Marvel. Every time we watch Tony Stark build his first suit in that cave, every time we hear him declare, "I am Iron Man," we're not just watching the birth of a hero. We're watching the salvation of the Avengers. The Avengers' true legacy. Today, it's hard to imagine a world without the Avengers. They're more than characters. They're symbols of resilience, teamwork, and destiny fulfilled. But their true legacy lies in how close they came to being erased. How close Marvel came to pawning them off, to scattering them across rival studios, to burying their potential under contracts and boardroom deals. The Avengers story is not just about triumph. It's about fragility, about how greatness is often born not from certainty but from desperation. The Avengers remind us that legends are not always recognized in their time. Sometimes the heroes we dismiss are the ones who rise to save us all. Please like this video and do not forget to subscribe this channel if you are still here and watching this video. So the next time you watch Iron Man suit up, or Captain America lift his shield, or Thor call down lightning, remember this: It almost never happened. The world we live in today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the billion-dollar films, the unforgettable lines, the global phenomenon of the Avengers, was one rejection, one flop, one cancelled project away from never existing. The Avengers were once worthless. They were once the characters nobody wanted. And yet by fate, by stubborn vision, and by the refusal of a few dreamers to give up, they became the most valuable, beloved team in cinema history. It is a story not just of superheroes but of survival, not just of destiny but of defiance, and in that perhaps lies the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the heroes we almost lose are the ones we end up needing the most. The Avengers almost never assembled, but when they did, they changed the world.